Okay. All right. So now we are going to look at chapter 23 of Samuel, beginning with the statement, these are the last words of David. These are not David's last words. What the meaning here would be, these are the latter words of David. These are words that David would have given late in his life. In the latter part of his life, he would have given him. He's going to speak after this, so this isn't his last words, but it's telling you that these were given late in his life. Now, David is kind of doing a small psalm here when he's discussing himself. He says, "Thus says David, the son of Jesse." That was always used as a humbling thing. Thus says the man raised on high. He was empowered by God. He was anointed by God. He was the psalmist of Israel, the sweet psalmist to the glory of God. He's just talking about when the Spirit of God spoke to him. He recognizes that the psalms that he's giving, that he speaks, are from the Lord themselves. His gifting, he's even giving the glory for his gifting of writing the music. The song spoke to me to the Lord. He talks about the justice. One of the things we didn't talk about in our last chapter was in that particular psalm, oftentimes David talks about the justice of the Lord. When he is a consuming fire, he will be mentioned. When he brings darkness into the people, when there's judgment that needs to be done. We don't like to talk about that. We like the really sweet parts of David's writings where he talks about the nature of God and how amazing he is, and he's faithful and he's merciful and he's glorious. But we don't like to talk about the just and righteous parts of God where he brings in judgment. But that's part of it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's the part of it. And if it's our enemy, we want God to be just and righteous. Right? Now, if we happen to be that enemy, we don't want God to be just and righteous. We want him to be loving and merciful and all of that. So it depends on which side of the coin you're on as a human as to where you see that. For God, it's not that way. It's all perfect and right. Whether he's being merciful and gentle and faithful, or whether he's being just and righteous in his term. And so David recognizes that, and that's part of what he has to say here. And he begins to talk about that. It says he has made an everlasting covenant in verse 5. We recognize that God's commitment to David was the ultimate commitment. He discusses his salvation when he says, "This is my salvation and all my desire," based on the Lord. And talks about the men who come against him and how God will deal with them. So this is more of David in his very talented, gifted way of speaking to the Lord. Now, starting in verse 8, you see the listing of David's mighty men. What I did, which I hope will make it just a tiny bit easier, is I gave you a list of them in this form so that you can just look at them and go down your list. The first three, 1, 2, and 3 of this, are called the three mighty men of David. Why are they selected as the three mighty men of David? We don't really know. They are listed as people who were important. There's some wording given on some things they had done, but there's actually more explanation on some of the other men. Whatever it was, these are the three that David calls these are his special forces. These are the three that, for David, were the three mighty men. And several times in the reading of these names, you come to the point where he says, and he was great, but he did not excel the three mighty men of David. And so
these weren't the leaders of all the rest of the mighty men.
Not necessarily. They are just three that are selected out of the group for special honor. These are three of the mighty men. And he begins to list them. He talks about them. One of them killed 800 in verse 8. The other one, Eleazar, the son of Dodo. He talks about how he attacked the Philistines for so long that his hand stuck to the sword because it was cramped around the sword. And the people that came after him didn't even have to fight. They just come to plunder because he had taken care of all of it. And so he begins to talk about some of the things that his mighty men did And in verse 13 it says, the 3 of the 30 men went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave. And that's when he was in the cave hiding from David. And in verse 15, the reason I have the picture on this particular packet starts in verse 15. It says, "And David said with longing, oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." Why would David want Bethlehem water? Because that's where David was raised. That's home. Nothing tastes sweeter than the water of home. And so he wanted that. And look at verse 16. "So the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and they took it and they brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but he poured it out unto the Lord. And he said, Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it." And these things were done by the 3 mighty men. So there's one particular reason why they're mighty in what they did. That's a weird story for us because they put their lives in jeopardy. They go out and they they get the water because their commander wants it, David wants it, and they bring it back sweaty and dirty, because they fought the Philistines and gone through the ranks to get the water. And David says, "Oh, I can't drink that." What is that about? Because the sacrifice that these people had made in getting that water was so great, David was not worthy to drink the water. The only one worthy to accept that sacrifice was the Lord. And he poured it out unto the Lord. David wanted that water. His men put their lives at risk to get that water. They bring him that water, and he says, "Oh, this is far too great a gift for me to simply drink." And instead, he pours it out unto the Lord. The sacrifice was just that great. And so I love that particular story. That's why I put that picture on the front of this. He goes on and he talks about, was he the Abishai, the brother of Joab? We've read about him a lot. We know him and the things that he's done. It talks about killing lions and killing Egyptians, calling him a spectacular man. With a mighty spear. He just spends a lot of time talking about all of the different ones, and then we get to the list that Jane graciously read for us, listing the names of these men. Who's the last man on the list? Uriah the Hittite, the one that David had killed, Bathsheba's husband. One of David's mighty men on the list. Interesting, isn't it, that he's on the list? And and so we recognize that God placed these men in David's life for the lifetime of how David would need them. Remember when they came to David? What were they? Do you remember? When they came to David and when he was fleeing from Saul before he ever becomes king?
Thieves and rejects.
Thieves and rejects. People who were in trouble, were mad at the government and didn't like anything. And God takes these rejects and he brings them together and he bands them together to the point where there's more than just this list of, these are the mighty men, these are the special ops guys, but there was a list of them that God gave to David, because even though David wasn't fighting this battle on his own, that God was always before him and behind him, bringing up the rear and leading the way, David needed people in his life to support him and encourage him and be there for him, that he could turn to and share life's journey with. So one of the questions I give you this week on your listing is something that I don't expect you necessarily to share next week, this part of it, unless you just want to, but it's who has God blessed in your life as a mighty man or a mighty woman, who's done life with you. Sometimes we have people from our early childhood who we've done life with. Sometimes they're people that were there for just a season that we've done life with, that were the encouragers. Maybe they're people, maybe they start out being people that don't even know the Lord or aren't walking with the Lord, or for whatever reason God has them in your life and you see them change. throughout the time that you have with them, and they be you in front of your very eyes over a period of time. You see them become who God intended for them to be. But we can't do life by ourselves, ladies. We just can't. We need people to walk with us, mighty men and mighty women. We need to have them walking with us, and we need to be the people who walk with others. We need to be mighty women for other people as support. That's why God builds a body, a church. That's why he had a nation in the Old Testament. That's why he builds a body in the New Testament, because we can't do life all alone. Ultimately, everything we have comes from God, but we need people that we can reach out to. And David had that, and these people are important to him. And in the end of his life, he recognizes that, and he realizes who it is that stood with him. So maybe this week you'll have an opportunity in your private time to think of a couple of names of people that you would like to put down just for yourself. And if you do that, I think some praise and thanksgiving to the Lord for putting those people in your lives, for the fact that you didn't have to walk this journey by yourself, and that you can be that for others. And the prayer that, Lord, bring people into my life that I can be that mighty woman for, that I can stand beside and walk through. All you need is one, but if you have 10, wow, you are blessed. So spend some time thinking about that this week. Recognize it and thank God for who you had, because I have a feeling that David thanked God at the end of his life for who he had placed him with, who did life with him. Yeah? Okay, well, you can turn that off. That's all we have on this one, and I will pray for you and hand out your questions.